It's a topic that the more I study this topic, what Darwin didn't know, the more I'm amazed that uh, what he taught surprisingly caught on at all. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that escaped the net and put him on the screen of popularity and fame and fortune. And I just don't understand. I mean, it must have been some kind of a plan behind this. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, except when it comes to the devil and what he does. He's the biggest conspirator at all. He's been doing it ever since the garden. And this stuff that it doesn't take much to really discover it, really surprises me. Boy, how did Darwin get away with what he did? Because there's a lot of stuff that could have been challenged. A couple of things before we get started, just by way of introduction. I'm involved in ministry. I was always taught that all of us as believers have the same ministry, and that is to preach, to teach, and to make. Preach the gospel, teach Jesus, and make disciples. That's our ministry. And then specific vision, of course, is really how God has equipped you to carry that mission out. But we all share that in common as believers, and it's a really uniting thing to think about. So when it comes to how my vision works out here with my wife and I is quite a while ago, we made a choice to devote our time exclusively to geology. That really, I believe, holds the key to unraveling the mysteries of Genesis. When the flood took place, it changed the history of the earth forever. And it scarred it, it churned it up. It's a weak, it's like taking a nice egg and dropping it. And now you've just destroyed it. And that's what happened during the flood. And so we really have concentrated on that. A man by the name of Charles Lyell in the 1800s, one of the fathers of geology, concentrated exclusively on the flood, and he destroyed the idea. So that by the end of the 19th century, there wasn't one educated geologist that believed in the Genesis flood. So he was quite successful at that. But he destroyed that, and then Darwin came along soon after. 1830s, Charles Lyell. 1859, Darwin came out with his book on the origin of the species. And he did for biology what Lyell did for geology. It was destroyed the flood. Darwin destroyed the creator. And if you can eliminate the creator, now you can eliminate the whole cause for being here, the accountability. All of those things get destroyed. And that has been a steady fight ever since. So that's part of what we do with Northwest Treasures. We moved to the south central part of Washington. It's in a valley called the Yakima Valley. And there are 500,000 people spread out through there. It's really quite an amazing thing. Really an agricultural area, but a lot of the kind of people we really want to see, one, and that is we devote a lot of our time to homeschoolers and families. And so I work with about 1,000 kids each year. And of course, that's our future, isn't it? That equip those kids to think critically and to be bold and confident is, I think, is going to be part of really what moves the gospel forward. And so we've got to do that. Anyway, when we moved out there, we purchased a piece of property that had a building on it that we'd been praying for years, and it became our geology learning center. And back there are a lot of pictures of what we've done with the center. And we get families. We opened it in March. We've had over 500 people attend so far, and it's exciting to see what's happening there. We also have a family geology camp in Washington in the Okanagan area, so northern Washington. And let's see, what else do we have going on? Oh, lots of stuff. We make geology kits for schools. It goes all over the world and includes the curriculum that we've written and then the samples that go into the kit. So the one thing we saw was a real weakness in our earth science studies and teaching was that the kids were studying pictures, but they weren't really handling the real things, the three-dimensional things. And, being able to learn how to record observations and doing some reasoning, some critical thinking about that. So we began to change that. And those kits are a very big part of what we do. You can sign up for our newsletter. Sweetie, where do they do that? Is that back there? Yeah, there's a place to sign up. And if you want, I know we'd rather have you do the first choice to support your creation organization here. If you're so led, we do have a way that we have a little app on there, or a little, what do they call that? I don't know the technology of it, but you can point your phone at it and click, and you see them on TV, all the other places. But that's back there on one of the display pieces. If you'd like to donate to the Geology Learning Center, we moved around 40,000 pounds of rocks, minerals, and fossils from our Seattle home when we moved 2 years ago. So that we have a lot of stuff for display. Okay, so what did Darwin not know when it came to the study of Earth history, even Earth science? And here's a picture here. It's kind of a bizarre looking picture. This is a picture of fossil fusulinids, or foraminifera is what they're called. Now these little things look like this. They look like little rice grains. They're very tiny, and they look insignificant. Of course, what Darwin didn't know was that he didn't understand DNA. In fact, the whole double helix DNA was not discovered until my birth in 1951. So it's very, very recent in terms of time here. But he didn't know about that. So he looked at these things and he referred to them as protozoa, meaning first animals. Now, this is where a little bit of Greek and Latin helps you to figure out what were these people really trying to say. You get all of these fancy words going on, and we don't know what they mean, what they say. And but if you can learn a little bit of Greek and Latin, now you can figure out what they're saying. So protozoa, first animals. And he had a view of life that involved very simple, primitive creatures on the bottom of the age of life, developing all up into the hierarchy, finally into European white man. This is what his view was. The white man of Europe was considered the highest rung on the intellectual ladder in the 1800s. And so everything developed was heading for that pinnacle. And of course, Europe was where it was at for the Enlightenment and for thinking about evolution of man. And it was a place really where the Bible, I think, was really set back. The church was caught totally off guard, and they didn't really know how to handle it. No one was prepared for it. He referred to single-celled creatures, and as well as a few other multi-celled animals like sponges, corals, and jellyfish as these primitive types of life. You look at corals, it's tough to understand. What are they doing here? Who are they? What are they? And jellyfish, I mean, they're kind of fun to watch, but what on earth was God thinking when he created these things? Well, Darwin was wrestling through all of this stuff. They couldn't figure it out. By the way, one of the things that I have discovered, I've looked through a lot of biology books, and they'll tell you how these creatures function. It's really quite amazing. But that's where they draw the line. They'll tell you this is an amazing creature, does what it does very well. But then you ask the question, okay, all right, I understand that, and I'm impressed. But what's its purpose? Why does it exist? What's it here to do? It's very similar to the questions you will ask yourself a lot of times. What is my purpose here? I understand that I'm an amazing creature, but what is my purpose? And he they didn't think about this word purpose. This is the other thing that they totally tried to obliterate, was the idea of purpose in life. To be an evolutionist, you don't discuss the word purpose. Purpose implies that there is something bigger behind life, and that is anathema when it comes to evolutionary biology and theory. It's just not it's not appropriate to talk about purpose. So they talk about the wonderful way these creatures are constructed, but they never touch on the purpose. And I had a hard time finding that. And sure enough, I go back to the Bible and start reading Genesis 1 again. And now you see the definition of purpose. Everything from the moment the space and the earth were created up until man in Genesis 1:21, everything was designed to support what God was doing with man. Purpose. And all these little creatures like fusilids all have a purpose, and God made them very, very, not only interesting creatures, but they have a purpose. We'll talk about that a little later. So the big question is, how could God create something so small and insignificant as these tiny living things if he was all powerful? Why waste his time? Today, we see these fusilids in the form of paramecium. If you ever looked at one of these things under a microscope, if you haven't, microscopes are fairly cheap today, but part of teaching your kids, get them involved in a microscope. I'll tell you, it's a lot of fun to do that and see these little creatures move around. They all have a purpose. And these foraminifera is another scientific name for them, means hole bearers. They were water dwellers, or are water dwellers, but being hole bearers, they serve a particular purpose. Without these little hole bearers, do you know that we wouldn't be able to survive on this planet? These little hole bearers are filter feeders. That's what they are. You can see a close-up picture of them back there. But they act like sponges. Sponges do exactly the same thing. Water comes into these filters, just like you install a filter on your refrigerator or swimming pool or whatever it is. These little creatures feel that they suck the water in. Water comes into the filter. They process the garbage in it as food. They live on this. And then they expel the clean water out. And that's what purifies our oceans, purifies our ultimately our water supply. That's purpose. Now, you don't find that in biological literature. They'll tell you, yeah, these are filter feeders. Okay, big deal. What does that mean? How does that relate to me? How does that help me? So they're filter feeders. Big deal. They're filter feeders because they serve the creator and the creation. And they serve it by helping man. Man can't do this stuff. Man does other things for God. But these I call the janitors of God's creation. And they're specially designed to do it, and they do it well. So filter feeders. Here's one under an electron microscope. A filter feeder is an animal that obtains its food by straining suspended matter and food particles from water. These fascinating creatures use a specialized filtering structure to extract nutrients it needs and then gives you clean water. Now, here's an amazing thing. Over 100,000 living and fossil varieties have been cataloged. 100,000 varieties. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And they take care of our environment. For what purpose? To serve us and to help us. Without these little foraminifera, we would have a hard time surviving on this planet. It would be a putrid planet. The water supply would be putrid. So they play a very important part. What Darwin did not know was that these tiny creatures did not evolve. They were created with a specific purpose. You can look at all of these. You can go up and down the invertebrate column of life, from the sponges, the corals, the jellyfish, the sea urchins, all serve a very specific purpose. Darwin never considered those. He only looked at the outward part of it and imagined them being primitive creatures that were evolving up the scale of life. Here's another one. Filter feeders in our created world clean and purify our environment. So I call them the janitors, God's janitors. Purpose in a world that evolved is meaningless. It's just meaningless. The two words don't go together. They're incongruous. And we have to consider that. These tiny creatures were primitive without meaning, and therefore were some of the first species to evolve to get to a higher form. That was Darwin's view. This is very close to his drawing. He shared an idea where everything living was interconnected and related. So your great grandfather was the protozoa on the bottom. You see him underneath there on the very bottom. We're right there. And that's who we're related to. We share a common ancestor with them. Everybody, every living thing shares this common ancestor. It's really a ridiculous idea. But what it does, if you keep following that and buy into it, you end up with no purpose. And Darwin did not, for some reason, that did not connect with him. The word purpose in secular science is anathema to the scientists. You can't get them to talk about purpose, because that, boy, I'll tell you, that reaches the conscience. And when you start reaching the conscience, now you touch a nerve between the person and God. And the story of my mother, she was actually the first person to witness to me. And I came home as a senior in college, and I came home one time, cocky college student, thought I knew everything. And she pulled me aside and she said, your dad and I are really concerned about you. And I shrugged it off. And she said, are you still going to church? And I said, nah, but I'm still searching, this kind of thing. And she looked at me. I expected my mother to jump in the ring and start taking a few swings at that point. She didn't. Very quietly just got up, looked at me and said, well, it's your soul. And then she left. She left the room. That did more. That fall, I became a Christian. And she did more to touch my heart and soul at that point than any other argument I'd been engaged in. And I learned a valuable lesson from that. But that's what you do when you touch that conscience. You begin to create that avenue between you and God. And then the Holy Spirit can do his job. Winning the arguments won't do a thing. They'll make a person mad, but and you may win the argument, but they won't win the soul, and that's our job. Here's another thing Darwin did not know. No one knew about this. In fact, the only person who began to touch on this idea of DNA was a guy named Gregor Mendel, who had published a paper at the time. He was a Catholic monk. And for some reason, he was involved in experimenting with sweet peas. And his question was, where do the characteristics of sweet peas come from? I mean, how are they passed on? Is it something like what Darwin was proposing? They just adapted them. Darwin had a very strange word, or a strange view of adaptation initially. He really thought, he started out believing that the way you changed into something better was to exercise whatever it was you needed to develop. So for instance, if you wanted to pass on a person's big muscles, and strength and so on, then the way to do that was to develop the muscles and the strength in the person. And that's what passed on the characteristics. And this was strange. Gregor Mendel said, that's not what I see in the sweet peas. The sweet peas, the colors that are passed on, the various shapes, they're passed on by way of reproduction from one sweet pea to another sweet pea through reproduction. Well, that's exactly what Genesis said. God created kinds, reproduce after their kinds. So characteristics of a kind, characteristics of humankind are passed on through reproduction. And that's exactly what he says. Darwin totally missed it. And he thought time was really the issue in evolution, that given enough time, things would change because of pressures from the environment. And he was dead wrong. And by the time of the 20th century, biologists were just kind of fed up with Darwin. They wouldn't come right out and say he got it wrong. But there's a lot of books out there that will tackle that whole issue. And so they began to look around for a new idea called mutations. And that would change the DNA structure or whatever it was that Gregor Mendel saw. That would change it, and it would change it rapidly. And so the new hope of neo-Darwinism came on the scene, and mutations were accepted. But this double helix here, this model containing 4 chemicals, have to be in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And each one of these chemicals are involved in every facet of living things, right from the foraminifera all the way up to the human being. In other words, what it demonstrated was that there is no such thing as primitive life. All life is complex and very complicated. These little foraminifera that I showed you all have their own DNA, and it's complete. And they all have this double helix. Now, it works a little bit differently, and the chemicals are arranged a little bit differently, but these chemicals comprise messages. And these messages are working away at operating all of the systems. The proteins need to be in the right place at the right time. The enzymes need to be in the right place at the right time. Everything functions like a well-oiled machine. And Darwin didn't know that. Had he known that, I doubt whether evolution would have gotten a foothold in Western civilization. I think it would have died on the vine. But 1951, there it is, the year I was born. This thing was discovered, and with it, it started just a whole new avenue of genetics, and really a lot of neat things. Darwin did not know about that. Excuse me. Here's another interesting and fascinating thing Darwin didn't know. You know, Darwin was a theology student for a while. I don't think he liked it. He never finished it. His grandfather pushed him into theology because that's where the money was. The guys who were the preachers were, they were taken care of by their by their communities. And Darwin thought, his grandfather thought, listen, I don't much like religion, but I'll tell you, that's how you're going to make a decent living. So go into theology. But here's one thing he did not know. Although he was a theology student, he didn't know his Bible. Either that or he ignored it. It doesn't take too much of a skill in reading the Bible. You can read it through seriously in one time, one passing, and catch the idea that something is different here. And he never discovered that. Here's what you do find in the Bible with just a cursory reading of it. The first 11 chapters of Genesis will tell you this much, that there is a historical framework that God has been developing. And this historical framework includes 4 specific periods of Earth history, from the beginning up until the flood, and then after the flood, the spreading out of mankind. It's a whole history, a whole story of where God has been going with man, and works up to, of course, in Genesis 12, introducing Abraham, and then into the promise of a Savior through one of the tribes of Israel. All of that's contained in the Bible, and it doesn't take much to see that. Darwin totally missed it. He really agreed with all of the other scientists of the time, which was that the Bible was a myth and its history was irrelevant. But had he paid attention to this framework, he would have understood that this is the proper way to interpret all things. It's your biblical framework. God has not just put that stuff there to make us curious. He's put that there as a roadmap for us so that we can avoid the errors that a lot of human beings have made through the years. The devil is trying to destroy this history. He keeps coming out. I know you can, get into your internet and bring up Google, and typically, just about every day, there's an article that comes across saying, it's either some dinky fossil they found that proves that man is, it began 200,000, modern man began 200,000 years ago, or some tooth that they found that proves the evolution between this or that, or even some discovery in Mesopotamia, usually, that shows that the history of the early civilizations were totally contradictory to the Bible. And the Bible is just, they must have copied these former peoples and civilizations. But that's not the purpose. We have this framework. The framework interprets, it's our interpreter when we find relics. If archaeologists say that Egypt began 5,000 BC, it's not possible, not if you believe the Genesis framework. The creation took place 6,000 years ago or 4,000 BC. How could you have the pyramids in Egypt existing 5,000 years BC? It's not possible, not unless the Bible is in error. But let's take that out. If the Bible is in error, now what? You guys are here. You're a bunch of fools. You believe in this character called Jesus as the Messiah. Boy, are you blind. But if he is true, now you've got exactly what God wants you to know and what it's going to take for escape from all of this garbage that we see. So that's the warfare. It's this conspiracy to undermine God, the creator, and to tell you a lie in hopes that you'll believe it, or you're going to take the time to accept the Bible and know it. Darwin did not know the differences between particularly 4 words. One is science, one is history, one is philosophy, and one is consensus. Let me tell you, if you learn those 4 words, you can be a dynamic person in witnessing. You don't have to know all of this stuff. I mean, I've 53 years of doing this stuff has crammed a lot of stuff in this noggin. I'm amazed at how much this head up here holds. But I don't use that much of it because it's not a game. My goal is to touch people's consciences. How do you do that? You do it by helping them question what they believe. And the only way to do that is not sit there and argue them to death. There's very few people who can argue me under the rug. There's very few because I've been there. I've done that. And I was mentored by the best of them, Henry Morris and Dwayne Gish. And I listened to their debates and I knew the tricks, but we weren't winning the people to repentance, but rather science. Listen, wait a minute. We're really talking about a lot of stuff. We need to get our definitions so where we agree. What is science? And this has been probably the big question for the last 10 years of what is science. We all went through this COVID period where, that was the main question. What's the science behind this stuff? Well, somebody answer that. And if you questioned it, well, you were in trouble. So it highlights the important thing is that we've got to define that word science. Because now then what you can do is somebody says, look, evolutionists have proven that we have evolved from slime and up the ranks, and now it's up to you and me. We're just chemicals serving no purpose other than to satisfy our own needs and so on. Well, wait a minute. Can you tell me what the science is behind that? Tell me everything you know about the science. What's the science? And sometimes they'll start out jabbering with a whole lot of things, and you can say, well, wait a minute, that's not science. That's your idea. So tell me, what is the science? I'm ready here with a pad and pencil here, and I'll write down all of the science things you can tell me. Can't. And I think once you get a person that's questioning a little bit, open that door a little bit to questioning what they do believe, guess who works? His Holy Spirit starts working in that life, just like it did with my mother. My mother did not have to say anything. It was just, it's your soul. That opened that door to my conscience. And all the way drive back to Kansas from Montana, finish out the school, I was thinking, oh man, she's right. And so I'd kind of secretly, oh God, don't let me have an accident here. I got to resolve this thing. So you want to get that conscience. So defining science, defining history. What is history? Philosophy. What is philosophy and what is consensus? A lot of people expect you to believe something because 1,000 scientists believe it. Well, that's not science, and it's not anything but consensus, but it's not science. So these are some things we need to look at. Science is knowledge gained from observation, testing, and repetition of tests. That's science. If it's not observable, if it's not being, you can't test it, you can't repeat it, it's not science, it's something else. You have to hold that definition pretty firmly and fast. Otherwise, you're all over the map of ideas. And most of what you'll be wrangling about will be ideas. So we have to be able to pin a person down, describe it. What is the science behind this? What is it? What's been observed, what's been tested, and then what's been repeated. Science has actually become a philosophical framework to give us a belief about the world. That's what it's become. Ideas have been enshrined with scientific terminology, and now they win the day. But science can only tell us what the fossils are and in what kind of rock they are in. They can't tell you the age. Science cannot tell you the purpose. It really can't tell you those. Those things all require values in some way. So that's not the purpose of science. It's a very narrow field, and it's very limited in its scope to explain things. Science can't explain the soul. Scientists can deny the soul, but it's still there. Science can't explain the soul. Science really can't explain the mind. We can understand how the cells and things work, but science can't tell you why you have it, why you're specifically made the way you are. Science can't tell us how old these fossils are in this piece of sedimentary rock, nor how they were formed. And these are, again, these little tiny creatures here. Most people would kind of say, well, that's kind of interesting and probably fossils, but these are very delicate creatures and they had a specific role to fulfill, crinoids, and they're in sedimentary rock. Now let's start talking about their purpose. So you get to something, you get to something like history, now we're dealing with documents. And so this is our famous document, one of two anyway, Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Those are the two that we have to hold firm. It's kind of like holding firm the Bible. If you let go of the Bible, you don't have anything. And in our country, if you let go of the Constitution and independence, you don't have anything. You don't have a country. And so it's kind of the fight there now is, okay, what does it mean to be constitutional? But this is all based on history. History deals with unique one-time events verified by eyewitnesses or historical documents. So is the Bible a science book or is it a history book predominantly? What would you think? It's a history book, isn't it? Who saw the flood? Did anybody observe the flood? Yeah, Noah and his family. There were 8 people. And in fact, that formed the civilization called Egypt. In the Old Testament, there is no such thing as the Hebrew word Egypt. It does not exist. Egypt is an English-sized version of a Greek word, Egypticus. And so when you're reading, the first time Egypt is mentioned is in Genesis 12 during the life of Abraham. Abraham goes to Egypt. Well, wait a minute. I want to know what the Hebrew word is there. I know what the English word is and where we got it from, but what's the Hebrew word? The Hebrew word is Mizraim. Who was Mizraim? Anybody know? Mizraim was Noah's grandson. Aha, son of Ham. And throughout the Bible, Egypt is always referred to as the son of Ham or the son of Mizraim. So there's the connection from Noah to Egypt. That's why knowing your biblical history is important. So the flood had to have come before the pyramids were built. Pyramids weren't built until after Egypt was established. When was Egypt established? Through Mizraim, Ham's son, Noah's grandson. And now you begin to finish out the rest of the story. So what we do with evidence where we have not seen the origin of it, I was going to tell you with Egypt, ancient Egypt preserves a record in artwork that's oftentimes used at the top of their obelisks, and it's called the Ogdoad. It's the family of 8. Are you awake here? The family of 8, and it's got 4 on one side and 4 on the other side. So you've got Noah, Mrs. Noah, his sons, and their wives. And there's the connection to Mizraim. Mizraim, the son of Ham, one of these family of 8. And that's where Egypt says they originated. Isn't that interesting? But that's all buried in our research and what the secularists tell us. It just doesn't mean anything. But you take that one little piece of history, that changes your whole outlook, changes your whole thinking. Darwin didn't know this, or at least he ignored it, at the very least. Evidence has to be interpreted. Evidence doesn't really speak for itself. Its evidence is, you can have 2 scientists, and I've often experimented with this, where I can take a rock into a scientist and ask him to explain this to me. We can both have a good time sharing the minerals that are involved in this rock and the color, where the colors come from. Now we're talking about the science. Perfect harmony between the 2 of us. And then all of a sudden, it's, well, how old do you think it is? Well, this rock you found in this particular place, verified by these particular fossils, is about 500 million years old. How old do you think it is? It's about 4,500 years, probably produced by the flood. What? And now it's World War III. So the evidence only tells you what is in it. It doesn't tell you where it came from or how old it is. You need different criteria to talk about the evidence. And the particular framework that secularists use is a framework we call uniformitarianism. It's a very powerful framework. Notice it has the suffix ism. That means a belief. That geologists believe that through many years, many millions of years of slow and gradual changes, the Earth was formed. It's the belief that present geological processes we observe today are the sole basis for telling us about the past history of the Earth. Here we have the first non-compromise thing in secular geologists. They will not compromise the framework. And guess what? That's a direct assault on the one non-compromise thing we should have as believers. It's the framework. Framework secularism is uniformitarianism. Framework in biblical view is the biblical historical framework involving creation through the post-flood period. That's non-negotiable. You can dicker about a lot of things within that framework, but that framework is non-negotiable. It is so for the secularists too. In fact, if you think differently, try to voice your opinion and you will not get a degree from that particular university. You have just compromised the most holy covenant that you should have made as a geology student. And they won't tolerate it. Christians, though, are all over the map. You know what the biggest dividing point in the church today is? Worldwide. The biggest dividing point is the age of the earth. Now, it's not that big of a deal to figure it out. It's a matter of believing what the Bible has said. It's really an easy thing to figure. God has made it that way. One of the culprits in this whole thing was Charles Lyell. He developed this belief system, uniformitarianism, for modern geology in the 1830s. Now, he and Darwin were pretty good friends. And when Lyell started to fashion this whole idea, came out with 3 books called The Principles of Geology, still in print today and still used by many colleges. The first volume of this series was given to Darwin when he went on his first voyage of the Beagle. And he read that thing. And all of a sudden, he had an epiphany. And it was that this was the stumbling block for Darwin. He couldn't figure out how things would change from one kind to a completely different kind. It stumped him. And he read Lyell's book, and Lyell demolished the flood, supposedly. And Darwin saw that the issue for Darwin, or for Lyell, was great ages of change brought about the presence of the earth and what was going on with it. And he said, that's it. It's the great ages of change that must be brought about to change one kind to another kind. It's time. And that really became then the second non-negotiable. It was the age of the earth. It's got to be different than what the Bible says. It must have required tons of time. We don't know how much, but tons more time than what the Bible says. Those are the non-negotiables. And if you don't embrace those, you better have a strong stomach, because you're not going to finish geology. They're going to do whatever they can to get you out of the program, because you have just violated the most holy relics of modern geology and modern biology. It was uniformitarianism that convinced Darwin about the evolution of life. And all of this, as you can see it coming together, the Enlightenment just did so much damage in the 1800s and set the course for our modern culture. Our modern culture today is in serious, serious trouble. When you cannot define what a female is, you have lost total contact with any kind of relevance to what God has planned all along. And we have got to see some of those things change. Biblical interpretation uses a framework derived from the scripture to tell us about earth history. You want to define scripture as revelation given to us by God as a historical document, tells us what happened in the past, very simply. Most of it is history. Both of these 2 types of things here, the Constitution and the limestone with the crinoids in it, are evidences. One is historical and is backed by eyewitnesses, people who participated in it and then passed it down to us. The other one is what we call non-historical. No one saw this take shape. Noah saw the general framework of the flood fitting in the 600th year of his life. But he didn't get out, swim around all the rocks that were being buried and formed into fossils and things like this. He didn't have a record book of what was happening. We just see it later in the evidence that's explained. But non-historical evidence means that we may know what they are. We can tell what these little creatures are. They're crinoids, and we have crinoids living today. But we do not know how old they are. There's nothing in the rock that tells you how old it is. And you have to ask them, well, what's the framework you're using? We need a historical document or a framework to figure that out. And Darwin had made the choice to embrace a framework that was totally at odds with the Bible. Secular geologists rely on the secular framework given to us by the Enlightenment. It wasn't science. It was a philosophical idea that was permeating Western civilization. The Enlightenment gave us the framework of uniformitarianism and deism. Now we've just moved a step away from theism to deism, and ultimately it turns into atheism. Deism is that middle step where there may be a God, maybe not, but if he created, he wasn't really involved in it after that. You see the step away from theism? Theism is a very personal God. It's a God who interacts with man, and he did, and he spoke to us, and he left a record. Deism steps way away from that. That was the result of the Enlightenment. And it was acceptable in culture during those days to embrace deism. In fact, the Unitarian Church came out of deism. It was a respectable way to be kind of like an atheist, but still be involved in society and some of the norms. And so long as you were in a church of some kind, you were accepted. But then came the 20th century, and we really got into atheism and moved totally away from it. Scientists crossed the line in the Enlightenment. They turned what was natural philosophy, which was a study of the physical world. That's what natural philosophy was back in those days. They turned it into naturalism, meaning no discussion of God. And they turned doubts in the Bible to anti-Bible. That by the end of the 1800s, there were movements taking place that would shape Nietzsche's ideas in the 20th century, and even finding their way into music, classical music. And it might surprise you what all showed up in classical music as a result of some of this philosophy. The offspring of the Enlightenment was secular geology and biology. Had nothing to do with science. Most quasi-geologists, Lyell was an attorney, actually. He was not a geologist. Hutton, the father of modern geology, was a medical doctor. And Darwin, I don't know what he was, but he was certainly an Enlightenment thinker. And so all of this was being shaped by man's ideas. Here's an interesting statement. Listen to this. This is an honest geneticist of our modern times. It's fun to find somebody who's honest, who's an atheist. And this particular atheist said this: "We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have made a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism or naturalism." That's a commitment to that. They don't arrive at it by studying the science. They arrive at it by a heart change inside of them. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our prior adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations. You see where we're going with this, how they think? This is the thinking process. No matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated, you and me, we sit there and scratch our head. How could you come up with this garbage? Moreover, that materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. There's the battle right there. It's not science and the Bible. It is philosophy versus the Bible. It's really the philosophy versus the history. That's the real groundwork for all of this. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. It's a philosophical commitment, and it comes first, then the interpretation of the evidence to support it. It is not science, but scientism, a belief. The science shows us specialized and completeness of life from their very first appearances in the rock record. All of these creatures here, I've collected thousands of these, and they all bear some very similar, some very same characteristics. Look at the fish on the left-hand side. The eye socket is perfectly preserved. The fins are perfectly preserved. And there are no links or critters leading up to this one that show how it got here. The only conclusion we can draw is that God created the fish in the sea, day 5 of creation, and a lot of them have developed different various varieties. Just like you look around in the room here, you see varieties of humankind, but it's one kind. Lots of varieties. And Darwin's really the one, who introduced the whole idea of racism. The kinds were the individual races. This is poppycock. We are varieties of one kind. That unites us all, regardless of the color of skin, regardless of whether you share a different heritage or a different nationality. We are one because God created us one kind with varieties. In our family, my mother didn't know this at the time. I don't know how much my grandfather knew this, but we discovered this one little thing about our family several years ago when my sister had some medical work that needed to be done. She was tested in the, 23andMe thing, and found out that, whoa, we are 25% Jewish. Where did that come from? Because, I grew up with, my dad was blonde hair, blue eyes. His relatives were all from Germany. And 6 kids, 4 of us have the coloring that I have. And, but my mother, kind of an enigma. She had dark hair and dark eyes. And when I look at her wedding pictures and I compare them to the young Jewish women, she really looks the part. But her grandfather, come to find out, she was 50% Jewish. Her father was a Lithuanian Jew who was part of the whole labor train. What's that called? Yeah, the orphan train. He had lost his parents. And so he was put on the orphan train to work, become parts of families in the United States, and particularly Wisconsin. But all of this is coming out. But if you look at our family, you've got the dominant genes here, and we're blonde hair, blue eyes, and then 2 of the family, dark hair and dark eyes. My brother Mike always used to complain to my mother that he said, "I'm convinced you adopted me." I said, "No, that's just not. Nope, we don't think that way, Mike." So the varieties are really an issue that Darwin missed totally. He thought varieties really didn't mean that much at all. He thought they were stages in the development of changing one kind into a completely different kind. And the fossils eventually would prove it out, and time would prove it out. And after 200 years of collecting, not one step closer to Darwin's thing. It's all showing that we have lots of varieties, but definite kinds. And it's determined by reproduction. The fossils in the middle, the ferns. Of all the ferns, I've found hundreds of these things, perhaps thousands of them. They all look the same. They're flat, all laid out flat. In Washington, the ferns grow like fury over there. And they'll stay for a while, and then they'll die. They curl up, turn brown, and blow away. These were all buried while they were still alive. Whoa, wait a minute. That's really, if this flood's the best explanation for that. It buried tons of these creatures rapidly and buried them while they were still alive in most cases. The clam, very simple clam. These are closed. If you've ever looked for clams on the beach, you'll notice they usually are, the halves are split open, they're laying there, or they're just one half, they've been separated. You almost never find a closed clam. Closed clam indicates that they were buried together and buried rapidly while still alive. Specialized fish, ferns, and clams from the beginning that were destroyed in this cataclysm we call the flood. But it is the biblical interpreted framework that tells us this, and that tells us that they were all specialized creations of God by an intelligent God. Science shows us the landforms, huge amounts of sedimentary rocks, water and mud-borne rocks, covering 70% of the earth. That's the science. What do you do with that? Well, what framework are you going to use? It's the Bible framework of the flood that describes their origin and gives the best explanation of it. Science shows us the fossil bones, that they're disarticulated. You almost never find a complete skeleton. No one has ever found, except for smaller dinosaurs. The T-Rexes, since the time they were discovered in Montana, 1915, I believe, there have been 16 that have been found, and the most complete is 65%. Well, that tells you that if they were really 60 billion years old of evolution, where are all the fossil T-Rexes? And the only way to explain it is that the flood ripped them up, tore them apart, spread them all over the place, broke up their bones, and that's how we find them. You go up into Montana or into Drumheller and you look for dinosaur bones, you're looking for pieces, disarticulated pieces all over the place. Best explanation? The flood. It is the biblical framework, though, that describes how the fossil bones and disarticulation came to be that way. Science shows us massive burial of marine fossils in muddy limestone. But it is the biblical framework that interprets their origin and how they got to be this way. Darwin could not answer these questions. They proposed a lot of things, but most of them have been rejected since then. Darwin did not know any of this because he had rejected the biblical explanation of creation and the flood. And contrary to what a lot of people think, he never recanted from that. That was his conviction till his dying day. Science can tell us about the intelligence of man, but it is the biblical framework that tells us why he is intelligent and what his purpose is here. Losing a sense of purpose, you lose your way in the whole creation, and you become subject to a lot of foolishness that's going on all over the place. Science can observe that the planets are all different. Why is that? If they all came from a gas cloud, they should have a lot more similarity than they do. Every single planet is different from the next planet. Why is that? Science can observe that the planets are all different. We do that. But it is the biblical framework that explains why they are different and how they got that way. Darwin didn't know about that. Dinosaur soft tissue shows a young age for dinosaurs. There's no other possibility for it. But it is the biblical framework that explains why the earth is young. It's all part of God's plan. It's the historical testimony of Jesus that validates the authenticity and authority of the Bible. Jesus expressed his faith in Genesis by using Adam and Eve and Noah, the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham as real historical examples. You ever think about that? If Sodom and Gomorrah never happened, why bring it up? It's worthless. It's irrelevant. If Sodom and Gomorrah did not exist and the tragedy happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, it didn't happen historically, what point is there bringing up a story that's based around Sodom and Gomorrah, this non-existent place? No, he brought it up because it was a very real historical place, and it serves the foundation. And when the thinking of the elites in the 1800s began to take over Western civilization, and they began to push all of this stuff out, they just sent us in the 20th century and 21st century into a tailspin. And we're paying the consequences for it in our culture. The biblical accounts of creation and the flood provide a solid historical interpretation of the geological and fossil evidence. In order for the evidence to be historical evidence, there must be documents, a framework in which to interpret the evidence. The Enlightenment built secular geology and biology. And this is why I say I'm not a conspiracy theorist, except when it comes to the devil and what he's trying to do. And he's been at it since the garden. Wipe away the truth of God's word, destroy the flood, destroy the creator, and he's got his kingdom, and you're in it. And it's a powerful war that we're involved in. It was the ideas of the Enlightenment that forced Darwin to question the biblical God and the scriptures. Darwin's philosophy built the idea that species of life had descended from a common ancestor, not the fossils. This philosophy is now accepted and taught as history and is a fundamental concept in science. Just dresses it up in scientific lingo. And that's supposed to impress us that it's the truth. Go back to those 4 words. What they tell me exactly? What is the science behind this? I'm ready to write. You go ahead. I won't say anything. I'll just write it down. What's the science? Most people can't tell you because they're arguing on an emotional level, and they don't think, they've not developed critical thinking at all. We've rejected that. What is the history? Are there any historical documents that record the transitions and things that have gone on to produce higher forms of life? What is the philosophy behind? What are really the men's ideas that have dominated this field? And asking the questions, and this should help us not only clarify our own position, but also to help break through in the hearts and the conscience of our fellow man. We're here to help them come to salvation. And you don't do it by hitting them over the head with a lot of knowledge. You can't do it. It won't work. No one wants to lose an argument. And they won't let you lose an argument. Even if they're convinced they're wrong, they're not going to lose that argument. So get them to question what they believe. And I think that's our best hope of seeing the Holy Spirit work and bring them to the gospel.
Thank you for your speech. And I'd like to, you mentioned soft tissue. Could you please explain more about that?
I missed
from
that.
The dinosaurs. I said you've talking about the soft tissues, about dinosaurs. Can you explain more about that thing?
You mean the
in the bones of the dinosaurs?
The disarticulated bones, you mean?
Yes. They found
soft tissue.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I got it. Yeah, actually, soft tissue is not a new issue. Back in the 1700s, a woman by the name of Mary Anning, who is considered to be the first woman paleontologist, she actually got into it quite by accident. Her father passed away, and she was left caring for her mother and the kids. And on the coast of England, there are lots of marine fossils all over the place. And so she began collecting fossils and selling them to get money to provide for the family. She became one of the best paleontologists in the world. But she discovered a mosasaur. Now, you know what a mosasaur is. It was a giant sea creature, a tannin in the Hebrew. And a giant sea creature, in some cases about 50 feet long, that still had soft eyeballs. And this is recorded. They all knew about this. But this kind of stuff has been showing up throughout the years. I've got a complete listing of the soft tissue, actual unfossilized, unpetrified soft tissue. And it raises the question, wait a minute here. Is the concept of billions of years of Earth history, is that really an appropriate framework to use with what we're discovering? You can't call these, I mean, they do call them anomalies, but there are so many of them that it's no longer an anomaly. It's a fact, almost a fact of paleontology. And then in the 1990s, it surfaced again. Now they've been discovering these things through the years. But another paleontologist by the name of Mary Schweitzer was working on preparation of microscope slides. She was actually working for Jack Horner at the time. Jack Horner is the guy who was the kind of the chief um, advisor to Steven Spielberg in the Jurassic Park movies. He's the guy that encouraged uh, Spielberg to change the name of the dinosaur that chased the kids around in the kitchen. How many of you have seen the Jurassic Park movies? Yeah, just a few of you. Some of us have fallen away, haven't we? But the dinosaur, they got the name wrong. The dinosaur in the kitchen was about 8 feet tall, and they named him Velociraptor. This name. Nobody knows what the word means, but it implies this fearsome creature. The word Velociraptor means swift thief, and it's originally found in the 1800s or early 1900s in China, and he was close to a clutch of eggs. So Roy Chapman Andrews thought that Velociraptor would be good for this dinosaur because he thought he was trying to steal the eggs of the Oviraptor. And so this story, of course, gets developed from there. But it's not Velociraptor at all. It's Deinonychus. That's the name of the actual dinosaur, found in 1964 near where I grew up in Montana. And this creature, he was related, of course, to the theropods, a variety of theropod. But one of his toes was strange. It was bent back like this. He had 2 toes, and then the third, one like this. And this gained a reputation. What was he doing with that weird claw? So Deinonychus means terrible claw. And that was the appropriate name for this dinosaur. No one today has figured out what this claw was. It was definitely some kind of a deformity. What did he do with it? I don't know. We don't know. No one's ever observed it except Hollywood. And they tell us that he would tap out messages, to the other Deinonychus, and they would plot. He was an intelligent dinosaur, and they would plot to get rid of these kids, This is, you got to stop. Wait, hold the phone. Yeah, well, how much of that is actual science and how much of it's philosophy and consensus? We don't know what they were. Dinosaurs like T-Rex, this ravenous carnivore they paint in the Jurassic Park movie. I don't know. No one has ever seen his eating habits. No one's observed his mating habits. He actually had very weak tooth structure. So her assistant was sawing open dinosaur bones and preparing microscope slides. It's a very interesting field. And he was looking at them, and then he'd record, and he took a second look, and he said, "Mary, you need to see this." And he was touching soft tissue. There were tissues that would expand and pop back, and there were blood cells, things like this. And they said, "Wait a minute, no, you've made a mistake. You've somehow, you have contaminated things. Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again." They went through this many, kept finding this soft tissue, and then she got into a panic. This is the kind of stuff that gets you fired. So she gets on the phone to Jack Horner and describes it. And Jack Horner said, "Well, you found it. Now prove it wrong." And that was so. The story, they did it again and again, and then word got out, and museums all over the place began rushing down to the basement, where the real relics are kept. They don't let you see those. Those are the holy relics. Only the high priesthood can get into those relics. And so they would go down there and start sawing open dinosaur bones. And sure enough, the thing just hit the proverbial fan, and it's created no small matter. And so they're looking for a mechanism. What would preserve? They're still convinced dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. What would be the mechanism for causing this dinosaur soft tissue to be preserved? And so someone came up with this brilliant idea of using iron sediments and compounds and things. Well, again, somebody's countered it. Look, it's this is a very poor preservative. Nothing gets done with this. In fact, the worst preservation you could possibly do to soft tissue is add iron to it. And so now that's gotten buried. But soft tissue continues to be this really stick in the mud. How do you explain soft tissue, first of all, in petrified bone? It wasn't planted there, it's part of the inner part of the bone. The only thing you can understand is that petrification was a process that was very rapid, captured the bone, preserved the bone, left part of it intact. It's the only way to explain it. And therefore, it is not ancient, but it's young. So that's, you can, there's been some incredible work done on that, and they've released a lot of stuff from ICR. I think they've just, Vicki, you were telling me about a new book that was just released from ICR on the soft tissue thing. Do you guys, in your books back there, do you have any of the videos and things that have been done on the soft tissue?
We had it tonight. There was by the group in Arizona. I think forget the. We'd have it on our website. Go to creationbc.org/store/shop. You can look for it.
ICR, yeah. There was another fellow by the name of Mark Armitage. I'm an acquaintance, Mark Armitage, but years ago, his primary job with USC in California was to teach microscopy. Now, this is a science now, how to prepare microscope slides. That was his job. And so he began preparing microscope slides and was curious. He'd done some dinosaur hunting out in Montana and come up with some triceratops horns, and he cuts into them. And now he came up with bone, stretchy bone cells. He wrote a little comic book for kids called Stretchy, and it was the story of the soft tissue in the triceratops. And he published his work. Oh, mortal sin. Bad idea, because USC fired him. And now Mark Armitage says, okay, what do I do here? So he takes him to court, and he won his lawsuit for an undisclosed amount of money. But the next thing that shows up in the next few years is this fabulous microscopy laboratory that he built. And that's about all he does. He does a lot of instruction. And I know a fellow in Minnesota that puts on these seminars with him. And you can go and actually learn how to prepare microscope slides. He gave me several slides from some of the soft tissue stuff they've been preparing. And but it's a fabulous part of the whole fossil thing. Anyway, it's quite a story.
Any more questions? Still have some time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you tell us about dating? How they date the rocks?
Oh, yeah.
And they
Boy,
say
that comes up. I'm not
billions of
surprised. Yeah.
Billions of years.
Okay, first of all, let me just tell you, there's only one bit of science in radiometric dating. Are you ready? Here it is. This is the only part of it that's science, and that is that radioactive elements decay. That's it. We can observe that. Radioactive elements decay. One of the reasons they decay is they are unstable. They've got most of them have too many neutrons in their nucleus, and this upsets the whole ball of wax. Radioactivity is really a mystery. Why would God create radioactivity? Some of it's very dangerous. It can rearrange your cells in a matter of minutes. It's very dangerous. But scientists fool around with it because the radioactivity in it is measurable in the present. And so the old Geiger counters used to measure the radioactive decay. You heard a click, 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 click in the Geiger counter. Now we can do it with an electronic, digitally thing. Those are fun. And I have in our geology learning center, I say, okay, kids, gather around here. I'm going to measure your radioactive level here. And of course, all of us have ambient radioactivity. It's a part, I think, of the fall. And then the flood just opened up the gates, and radioactivity is spread all over the world. The Colorado Plateau, full of sandstone and dinosaur bones, all of the dinosaur bones glow in the dark under fluorescent light, which means they all contain uranium, very deadly radioactive element. You can measure that in the present by the clicks, clicks. I'll just call them clicks per second. Every radioactive element has one of those. Now, here's what's happened with it. This was discovered in 1897, long after they concluded the Earth was old. So that had already been set. The geologic timetable was finished. The age of the Earth was set, at least for the beginning of multicellular life, which is 550 million years old. There are a lot of rocks underneath that, but nothing with fossils in them. So that's what they'd concluded by 1897. And then radioactivity was discovered. And some British geologists got the idea, we can use this to date how old rocks are by measuring the radioactivity. And so the first radioactive date came out in 1912 by a British geologist named Holmes. And you know what the age of the Earth was then? Because of the radioactivity? 1 billion years. Whoa, wait a minute. How old is the Earth today? 4.6 billion years. How did they get that date? They got it from a meteorite that's supposed to be older than the Earth. And so when it landed here, they applied the same procedure to it. And voila, now they have to change Mr. Holmes's date. Now it's been readjusted in the 60s to 4.6 billion years old. And so what are they doing to get these ages? Because these are changing all over the place. When we've measured the lavas at Mount St. Helens, the most recent lavas, we know exactly how old they are. But the minerals in the lavas and the lava itself measures all the way the gamut, sometimes 200,000 years all the way up to 2.5 million years. But something's wrong in the whole clock. You know, it's kind of like telling you my grandson, the youngest grandson's 4 years old, and he's able to swim the mile in 5 minutes flat, you know. And I show him the watch. Look, this is my timer. You'd automatically conclude, buddy, your clock is way, way off. That doesn't happen. Well, because of our historical framework, we say the same thing. No, wait a minute. No, you've got it wrong somehow. You're making a mistake. So here's what they do. They take the present rate of decay, very scientific, they can measure it. And they just simply assume, because of uniformitarianism, which says what? Slow processes have continued unchanged throughout ancient history to today and into the future. That's the non-negotiable. So they assume that the radioactive decay they measure now has always been the same in the past and will always be the same. And that's the first big assumption. Now, what's wrong with making that assumption? Well, first of all, it's not scientific. There's no observation. The only observation is the present. That's the science. The consensus, the philosophy, deals with what you do with it. When you start making assumptions about past behavior and future behavior in geology, you are really taking a big risk. What's at stake here? Well, what's at stake is the existence of God, his Bible, and the plans for man. If scientists, what they're saying is true, you just forget this Bible nonsense. Go home. You're occupying precious utilities here. You know, it's worthless. But if they're wrong, now they lose eternity. And that's somehow we've got to make that point. That's the first big assumption. The second big assumption is based upon what typically volcanic rocks, those are what are measured. And volcanic rocks have radioactive minerals in them. And so you have what we call amongst all these minerals, you have a parent element like uranium. And this parent element is radioactive, so it's decaying. And then you have, if you look at the periodic table, if you start subtracting atomic particles out of the nucleus, you're going to end up with a smaller element. Isn't that correct? Yeah, you'll end up with a smaller element because you're taking particles away. So uranium-238, all of a sudden you get down the periodic table and you find this one element that's stable. It no longer, it's not decaying, and it's 206. Well, that is a smaller element than uranium. Uranium has been decaying, therefore, until it reaches its final stage in lead, 206. I mean, that kind of is reasonable, wouldn't you think, to draw that conclusion? The problem is no one's ever observed it. We find uranium and we find lead. Now, there's all kinds of things that can happen to a rock. In geology, we have this thing called leaching. Rock easily leaches its contents simply through running water. Running water can change your whole assumptions by washing away these different elements and making it look like they're older or younger than they really are. So if you have more lead than you have uranium, what should that tell you? That the rock is very, very, very old. However, if leaching makes it so that you have much less lead than was originally there, you'll never know that, but it has that effect. Now you're talking about a younger rock than what you really have. You're not changing the chemistry, you're just simply washing away the evidence. And that's called leaching. It happens all the time. It's a very common process in geology, leaching. So most of radiometric dating is based on those assumptions. You have to assume that what you're examining in the rock is the original parent daughter element, and that what you observe has gotten there from the radioactive process. How could you ever know that? You couldn't. You're making assumptions. And those assumptions are very, very dangerous. They're destroying the faith of a lot of people. And I think if you don't understand it, it's the Achilles heel of Christianity. But all you have to do is take a look and ask those questions. What's the science behind this? What is it? What is the philosophy? What is the consensus? And now you've got this conflict with a history that Jesus himself embraced. What are you going to do with that? Huh? This is a historical document that Jesus said was true. If Jesus was wrong, forget it. He's not our Savior, because he has sin that he has not dealt with. You see where all this goes? You have to kind of think through it all. And you're right back with the observation that scientists have made a mistake. We just have to help them see it. And they're using this whole process of radioactivity really errantly. It's not used for that. All we can tell is that radioactivity exists, and you can measure it in the present. Here's the other thing about leaching and change. What if the global flood was a true event? What kind of impact would it have had on geological processes? It would have changed everything. The amount of heat and the amount of pressure released by the flood was sufficient to give us metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks are changed rocks. It's like cooking. Cooking is really a form of metamorphosis. You want an all-day meal ready to go in 2 hours, you use a pressure cooker. Then you break down the chemistry of the food. You've metamorphosed the food. You want fried eggs go into a hot pan, forget it. You'll never return them to the original egg. You've changed the chemistry, and you did it with heat. And heat and pressure those are the two fundamentals of metamorphic rocks, heat and pressure. Did it happen slowly or rapidly? With the flood, there's very real evidence that it happened rapidly. And the minerals in many of the metamorphic rocks are the same that are in granite. We have no idea how granite was formed. This is one of the big questions that bothered me when I was in college. We talked about granite being billions of years old, formed by molten magma deep underground. That was the definition of granite. And it's just, wait a minute. Has anybody ever seen this? You guys know of any geologists that have ever witnessed this process happening? No, zilch, zero. So why would they teach that? Because it fits into their one non-compromise holy commandment, which is thou shalt believe in uniformitarianism. The present is the key to the past. And that's what happens in the whole field. They are as philosophical as they blame us for being. When, as a matter of fact, it's very simple. No, we're historical. That's what we're doing here. Does that answer the question? Yeah.